Fifth gear first saw the light of day in 2002, and it's been going like a train ever since.
I love this.
In that time, hundreds of stories have been told about every conceivable type of car and how well they do their job, sometimes under the most extreme conditions. So the team thought it was time to put together some of our favourite items from over the years and group them in handy categories.
I don't want to come off the road.
This time we're looking at a fifth gear speciality, crashes. Over the years, we've stage managed a number of highly complex impacts to examine the effects on the vehicles and their occupants. The first one took place back in 2003 and recreated a 60-mile-an-hour head-on smash.
We're creating a typical head-on accident at typical speeds with typical cars, except they're remote controlled. The tension is high. To capture the carnage in as much detail as possible, we've got 3 ruggedized ultra-high-speed film cameras, 3 digital cameras normally used for military research, and a camera the size of a thimble transmitting the onboard view. Despite our non-scientific approach, our operation has caused quite a stir in crash testing circles, and the Millbrook Research Facility's Andrew Beach has come to observe. There would have been no survivors. Airbags would not have helped. So, Andy, what was here that isn't there anymore?
Well, you can see, because the vehicles didn't actually head on, that on this side of the vehicle, which wasn't hit, you can see the wheel, the suspension and the front structure.
But that beam, isn't that beam pretty solid?
It is, but look at this side. The whole of the wheel's been pushed back, the suspension has gone. That beam has been crushed back, just like it's a bit of tin foil. Here, you can see the engine. It's been twisted in the whole vehicle. The prop shaft is broken. And if we move backwards here to what's left of the driver's door, you can see that the front wheel is now practically touching the back of the driver's door.
And there's no better news for the Beamer. Steering wheel's like right in. There's no room between the front seats and the back seats.
That's right, just look at the amount of crush you've got here, the deformation in the A-pillar, how that's been pushed right back. The wheel has been pushed right back into where the driver's feet would be. And if you look to see the engine really hasn't moved that much. It's more or less where it was. So that shows that when the two cars collided, the engine, the front structure and the engine didn't really take a lot of the energy. It's only when the cars impacted in this area that the actual work started to be done, and most of the energy has been absorbed here, and as you can see, that's resulted in a lot of deformation.
So, Andy, I mean, these cars are, what, 10 years old? I mean, are modern designs any better at surviving these sort of accidents?
Yes, modern cars are designed to undergo what's called an offset test, where we actually deliberately only impact half of the vehicle width. So the sort of damage that you see here would be less on a modern car. But I have to say, this 60-mile-an-hour test, compared to we test at 40 or legally 35 miles an hour, is still way above what a modern car would be able to survive.
In 2004, we decided to see what would happen when a new car hit an old one, purely in the name of science, you understand.
Over the years, crash testing has taken an astonishing variety of forms. Oof, I felt that. This next effort by Volvo is particularly inventive.
But until 7 years ago, most cars were only designed to cope with 30 miles an hour head-on into a concrete block. If the steering wheel didn't move too much, the car passed.
Today, crash testing laws are tougher, as are the cars, and the European crash testing outfit NCAP carries out even more challenging tests at an increased speed of 40 miles an hour, and sophisticated dummies measure the human damage in detail.
The better a car does, the more stars it gets, with the maximum being 5. And, as they say, safety saves lives. But it also sells cars.
So manufacturers have a big incentive to produce stronger, safer motors. Fine, good, great.
Well, it's fine, good, great if you've got a new car, but it might not be if you're in an older car, like these. The NCAP test started 7 years ago, but most of the cars on our roads are older than that. A squashy car from, say, 1995 hitting another squashy car at 30 miles an hour might result in survivable injuries for both drivers.
But what happens if that older car hits one of today's 5-star rock-solid cars? Well, we've decided to find out. One deserted crash test area, one old car, one new car. We've chosen Renault Espaces because the new one is the real school SWAT. Of all today's 5-star cars, NCAP rate the Espace as the safest. In fact, they say it's the safest car they've ever tested.
This typical 9-year-old Espace was a good performer in its day, and it's just the sort of thing you see full of families all the time. But exactly how much has the new car moved things on? Renaults say it'll absorb 2.5 times the energy of the old car, whilst the body shell has been stiffened to help withstand high-speed crashes.
But if you're not careful, that extra rigidity can transmit increased forces to the next weakest link in the chain. The passengers. So it's vitally important to bring them to as graceful and as cushioned a halt as possible.
Whilst the old car only had 1 airbag, the new one has 8, with the front 2 deploying at varying pressures depending upon the severity of the impact and the weight of the passengers.
There are airbags running along both sides to protect the head, and in the first 2 rows there are airbags at chest level. Drive off without a seatbelt on.
And an annoying bong drives you mad, which scores big points with NCAP.
The cabin boasts even more clever features, like the seatbelt pre-tensioners. 5 milliseconds after a crash, they take up the slack to prevent this happening. Then there's the reinforced rear seats to keep luggage at bay, close contact head restraints all round, and proper 3-point seatbelts in the back. No nasty lap belts to chop you in half here. On paper, it's a state-of-the-art safety system, but how well will this goody two-shoes do in our real-world crash?
To find out, we've come to the Motor Industry Research Association's Havoc area, a secret test site in the middle of nowhere used by the military and government. It has £200,000 worth of electric drum winch, a beast that boasts the power of 200 car engines. When we press fire, a network of cables will pull the 2 cars into one another at 35 miles an hour, guided by a high-tension wire. We're lining them up for the collision the NCAP test is designed to replicate, driver's side to driver's side, just like a real-life head-on smash.
In the cabin are a right pair of dummies. Meet Tiffy and Vic, our stunt stand-ins. Worth £100,000 each, they're wired up to record the G-forces on every part of their bodies. Time to make your predictions and place your bets.
Do you still think they don't make them like they used to, and the new car will tear like tissue?
Or do you think the new car will demolish the old one?
Perhaps you're sceptical and think that the 5 stars are just a marketing ploy and both cars will perform similarly.
Well, don't blink and you won't miss it. make sense of the wreckage, we've recruited Crash Engineering Research Chief Richard Morris.
Now, Richard, I first have to say, I mean, this is your job, but to me, I'm always shocked by the amount of damage that's done. And this is just two cars at 35 miles an hour going head-to-head. I mean, this guy is just jammed in. There's no way we can get the door open or anything.
No, I don't think on this particular test that there'll be any reasons to get the driver out, because I think he would be dead. We've had a catastrophic failure of the occupant cabin. It's just total overload there, and again, the sill, another major structural part, and that's all just completely disintegrated. The area where his feet were is now roughly where the wheel is, so no, I don't think that would be survivable.
But the torso seems to have gone out of the seatbelt even. The seatbelt hasn't held him.
That's right, I think the seat has actually gone inboard, and that's why he's partly come out of the seatbelt.
And because the driver was lurching around, he wasn't in the airbag's line of fire, which meant it was rendered useless. So, a car that's only 9 years old and yet a lot of damage.
Indeed, yes, not
Whereas
good at all.
the newer model looks at first glances to have fared better. Let's see if we can open the door on this one. No, that's still not going to budge, but looking inside, the driver's feet are still on the pedals, there's no intrusion of the steering wheel, but the airbag hasn't gone off. Sure, that's wrong.
Well, it depends on how the car has determined the severity of the impact. If we look at the front of the car, if I move these parts off here, you can see that the main structure here is still fairly intact. We've had a little bit of deformation up here.
And that's a designed crumple zone.
It is, yes. You can see the features to allow it to crush there. So we believe that the car has decided that this was not a severe enough impact to fire the airbags.
This high-speed footage shows how the red car comes to a much more abrupt stop, with the black car's wheels rolling for longer, indicating a gentler deceleration. All the new Espace felt it had to do to protect its occupants was fire the seatbelt pre-tensioners, evidenced by the cracked plastic at the anchor point and mild chafing on the belt itself. Presumably this damage wouldn't have been as bad if this car had hit a car of similar age.
Yes, I believe that's true. This car has seen a lot of damage because it's hit a very, very stiff modern NCAP car. If it had hit a similar car to itself, there'd have been less damage, less injuries, and perhaps the driver would have survived.
So, I mean, it really is a classic double-edged sword.
Yes, I believe it is. And until we see more cars which are highly Euro NCAP star rated, then we'll see this problem as they hit the older cars.
Everybody in the new Espace would have walked away, as might, this time, the passengers in the old Espace. But the data shows their driver would have taken the brunt of the force, up to 84 G at the chest. That could mean massive internal hemorrhaging. The driver's legs would probably have been seriously fractured, with the thigh bones being pushed back through the buttocks. Blood loss would have been enormous, and with access to the lower legs being so restricted, the emergency services would have taken 30 to 40 minutes to extract him. Survival was highly unlikely, and remember, all this at just 35 miles an hour.
If that's got you concerned that you can't afford a safe car, then don't worry. A highly rated car in the right size for you may be cheaper than you think. 5-star cars start at around £5,500 for a second-hand Renault Laguna. And there's a whole host of cheaper 4-star cars that will stand a crash much better than that oh-so-tempting old banger you've got your eye on. The Euro NCAP website has all the ratings, and if you need any more motivation to go there, just remember this.
Although most of our crashes have involved cars, there was another road safety question we wanted the answer to. And for that, we needed something a bit bigger.
In a moment, we're going to crash this truck into this bollard. Why on earth should we want to do that, you might ask? Well, let me explain. It's a sad fact that one of the most thoroughly unpleasant uses you can make of a car or a truck is to turn it into a bomb. You'll remember IRA attacks from the past, like the one in the City of London in 1992 and Canary Wharf in '96. They both used trucks filled with explosives. Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma bomber, packed his explosives into a rented truck. The blast killed 168 people. And suicide bombers often use cars and trucks too, driving them to the heart of their targets. Fortunately, we've never suffered a suicide car or truck bomb in the UK. But in our current state of alert, particularly following July's London bombings, it's a threat that needs to be taken very seriously. So, what can be done to protect us against it? Well, as part of a long-running research and development programme run by the security service MI5, there's continuous innovation and testing of a whole range of measures from a number of manufacturers. This is the Avon Rising Blocker. This is their drop arm barrier. And there are some newly developed sliding gates. Unlike in Hollywood movies where gates always fly open, these gazebo gates stay reassuringly shut. For our test, we've picked one of the most unassuming and surprising of these measures, one perhaps not normally associated with cutting-edge innovation, the humble bollard. This one's made by a company called ATG Access. They're a British firm, founded by a former painter and decorator who became interested in the unlikely subject of bollards when his neighbour's car was stolen. Determined to do something to avoid it happening again, he developed a security bollard system in his garage, which the company still sell today as an anti-theft device. They now sell bigger bollards too, for billionaires to protect their homes and for councils to control access to city centres. Bollards that work by remote control and raise up and down at the command of transponders in cars and buses. But they now claim to have created an ultra-high security bollard that can withstand the force of a hostile truck attack. We can't reveal the trade secrets that promise to make this bollard so tough, apart from saying it's all down to the special materials used and what's installed beneath the ground, the stuff you can't see. It can be lowered flat to the floor when it's not in use, but when it's needed, it can be raised in seconds. It's just 1 metre high and 35 centimetres across, but its makers claim it's tough enough to stop one of those. So tonight on Fifth Gear, we've arranged for the first televised demonstration to see if their claims are justified. Here at Myra in Nuneaton, we're using a high-speed winch to pull the truck into the bollard. And as a substitute for the potential explosive payload in the back, we're using a slightly more inert substance, bags of sand. Right, let's do it. The truck is stopped dead. Though the cab and a shower of debris carries on forward, there's no way it would be going anywhere after this. The bollard is enveloped in wreckage, but how has it taken the impact? Amazingly, it looks totally intact. Even more amazingly, it still works. The test is a complete success. I never thought I'd be able to sleep more soundly because of a bollard, but now I do.
For our next crash, we went small to answer one simple question. Smart cars might be cleverly packaged, but just how safe are they in a big accident? Let's just say you hit a concrete wall at 70 miles an hour, for example.
Intuitively, we think small cars are bad news in a crash because they don't have a long bonnet to act as an energy-absorbing crumple zone. The Smart gets round this by taking a different approach.
The key to its defences is its so-called tritium safety cell, a rigid steel cage reinforced at key points. Smart describe it as the hard shell of a nut. with small but efficient crumple zones both at the front and at the rear. In theory, getting inside is like putting on a suit of armour. Even when it hits something more than twice as heavy, the bit where you sit is remarkably unaffected. There may not be a long crumple zone, but look how the Smart's windscreen remains intact. This is testimony to the rigidity of the passenger cell.
The downside of the shell's rigidity is that there's a greater potential for the crash forces to be transmitted through to the passengers. Ideally, you want to slow them down as gently as possible. So you get seatbelt tensioners that stop you lurching forward violently, and they're fitted with force limiters that give you a bit of slack before they dig into your chest. The car's also fitted with a driver airbag, a passenger airbag, and a steering column that will retract out of the way in a crash to give you more room to slow down.
That's the theory, but no one knows how the car will behave when it's crashed at 70 miles an hour, which is where we come in.
We've enlisted the help of engineering guru Dr. James Brighton. His team have converted a Smart so that the brakes, steering and throttle can be operated via remote control. Dr. Kim Blackburn will guide the Smart from a chase car straight into 20 tonnes of concrete block. It'll be similar to losing control at 70 miles an hour and spearing off into the temporary barriers on a motorway.
Kim to James, 10 seconds. 10, 20, 35, give me space, thank you. 40, 5.
From 70 miles an hour to naught in 1 second. The little Smart hit with such energy that it moved 20 tonnes of concrete, leapt into the air and rebounded to the side of the road. We didn't know what we'd find when we reached the wreckage. The steel cage has certainly done its job really well. You can still see the original shape, just that one nasty kink there. Don't forget, this is a car without a roof. The plastic was just shattered. So without even the strength of a roof, there hasn't been that much effect. You can in fact open the door. Bits fly out. And it's only really when you come around the front you do see that massive impact. Around the other side, though, it still looks remarkably like a Smart car. You can see the full shape of the door. Indeed, the door not only opens normally, it closes again. So that does show how well that cage has worked on this impact.
We were staggered at how well the Smart seemed to have stood up to our high-speed collision, but couldn't help wondering how a conventional small car would have performed in a similar test. So we found out. Another remote-controlled 3-star NCAP car, 70 miles an hour into concrete blocks. Without a super stiff structure like the Smart's, you can see how this car's bodywork ripples as the shockwave dissipates. But again, the body looks remarkably intact, given the huge energy involved. Closer inspection revealed that there had been some intrusion into the footwell, but in comparison, the Smart looked to have suffered even more.
Perhaps most surprising was the obvious energy-absorbing qualities of the concrete. The Corsa's greater mass moved the blocks more than the Smart, but in both cases, the concrete didn't necessarily deliver the killer blow you might have thought.
But here's the rub. The cars may have stood up to the severity of the crash surprisingly well, but the humans inside wouldn't. No matter what you drive, rapidly decelerating from higher speeds is something your internal organs simply cannot cope with. The chilling truth is, the people inside both cars would have been very unlikely to have survived.
So, how much stick can a Smart take? A lot. But that can't be said for its passengers.
So far, we've seen various examples of front-end impacts. But back in 2005, John Bentley wanted to see what happened when you hit a car from a different angle.
This is a high-speed crash test facility, and we're here to perform our most shocking crash test yet. We'll be investigating one of the hottest topics in car safety, the mismatch that happens when cars of different types collide. What car crash experts call the compatibility problem. The problem is that cars come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, which means that when they smash into each other, it's rarely a fair and equal fight. For a start, big cars tend to be stiffer than small cars and crush them in a car-to-car crash. Here's a BMW 5 Series crashing into a Saxo at just 40 miles an hour. Add a difference in height between the two cars and things get even nastier. That's because the fronts of cars aren't evenly strong. They tend to be very stiff around the chassis rails and to a lesser extent the engine block, and much softer everywhere else. And those stiff bits are at different heights on virtually every car on the road. So if you hit a car whose stiff bits are higher than yours, it'll tend to ride over your car, punching through the soft bodywork and making sure that you come off worse. The height of your car is so crucial that even some extra luggage or a full complement of passengers can mean the difference between life and death. Take these two identical Mondeos. The one on the left is loaded up and riding 2 inches lower than the one on the right. Detail shots of the wreckage show the car that was higher has a relatively intact passenger area. But in the lower car, the footwells and dashboard have been forced back into the cabin as the car was overridden. Just 2 inches difference in height, even with otherwise identical cars, would have proved catastrophic for the driver in the lower car. Some of the worst compatibility problems are when 4x4s run into small cars. Then there's a difference in size, stiffness, and height. The 4x4 overrides the small car as well as crushing it. So what can be done about these compatibility problems? Well, from 2007, legislation is likely to require a test against a load cell wall to ensure all new car models have more evenly strong fronts. We're already seeing extra low-down structure on 4x4s like this Volvo, for example, so there's less chance of them overriding ordinary cars. We're also likely to see legislation to make the fronts of big cars softer and the passenger cells of small cars tougher. All this should help reduce compatibility problems. But so far, we've only considered head-on crashes. In the US, where 4x4s are around a third of the new car market, there's a growing worry over another type of horrifying accident, where a 4x4 hits an ordinary car side-on at a junction. What can be done about that? Well, here's a test done by America's Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which uses a special rig to simulate the side impact from a 4x4 at 31 miles an hour. This is a Toyota Corolla without the optional curtain airbag. The dummy's head actually makes contact with the high bonnet of the 4x4. With an airbag, the direct hit at least is avoided. According to the Institute, curtain airbags cut deaths by 45% in side-on crashes. But can technology make a side impact survivable at higher speeds? That's what we've set up our test to investigate.
The Shogun's going to be driving along this line from there at 60 miles an hour. The Civic's going to be tootling along at 30 miles an hour from that direction. At this point where I'm standing, the Shogun's going to slam into the side of the Civic. Just the sort of crash that could happen at any A-road junction.
The Civic has been completely wrecked. Where the driver's side doors used to be, there's just a gaping hole. I inspected the remains with vehicle safety expert Roy Quinney.
I mean, do you think there's any chance anyone would have survived in this?
It's highly unlikely. I mean, as you can see from the intrusion of this, this is the driver's door over here, and that's the handle release there. But as you can see through here, that's the leg of the dummy. But if you open this front door here, you'll be able to see the remains of the leg of the driver still in the passenger area down here.
It's actually come off.
It's detached, yes.
It's a massive compatibility problem. The soft side of the car collapses when the stiff front of the 4x4 hits it. The 4x4, on the other hand, scarcely crumples at all, driving almost clean through the car's bodywork. From overhead, you can just make out the off-roader's bonnet practically touching the far side of the car's passenger space. Despite the 60-mile-an-hour impact, the 4x4's front sustains very little damage. The bumper and bonnet were deformed by a few inches, but underneath, the chassis rails were virtually undamaged. The compatibility problem is made even worse by the height at which the 4x4 hits the car. Another car of the same size would have impacted our car lower, making contact nearer our car's sill line where it meets the B-pillar, a point of strength that would have offered some resistance. But the height of the 4x4 means it hits halfway up the door, where the car's much weaker. The 4x4 survives the initial impact, relatively unscathed, and is still travelling at 45 miles an hour. But its high centre of gravity makes it prone to rolling over. And when its axle catches on the wreckage of the car, that's exactly what it does. So what would have happened to the people inside it?
Well, on the basis it maintained its integrity, I maintained its shape. This is a good for the occupant because you maintain the distance between the head and the roof. Now, obviously, there's minimal restraints on this vehicle, so it's only the belts that have held him in. So the passenger's done really well, although his foot is trying to hold the door open there. The downside is because there's no inflatable restraints, the arms have come out the window for the driver, and in reality, he probably would have bled to death.
So, curtain airbags would have helped here, just to keep your flailing arms inside the cabin. But they wouldn't have helped anyone in the other car at these speeds. Our Honda was over 10 years old, and newer cars now have much tougher side structures, but they still wouldn't cope with a crash of this severity. This is one compatibility problem that technology isn't yet up to solving. Curtain airbags can help you survive a side-on crash with a 4x4 at lower speeds, but when it's doing 60, the forces involved are just too massive.
Now it's time for the final collision in this collection, and in 2011 we decided to stage the most extreme real-life crash test imaginable. The result was truly shocking.
We've built a reputation for hard-hitting car crash tests. Today, we're adding another eye-opening chapter to our story of destructive research. You're going to witness the fastest car crash test that we, or anyone else in the world, has ever conducted. This Ford Focus here is going to go on a little day trip into this concrete block at 120 miles an hour. It's an extreme test that's equivalent to the worst scenario imaginable. Two cars colliding head-on whilst both travelling at 120 miles an hour. Crash Authority Euro NCAP conduct tests at up to 40 miles an hour. We're going 3 times faster, partly because modern cars can reach such speed, and partly because we're curious as to what would happen if a car was exposed to such enormous forces. At 120 miles an hour, our experts say that the deformation will be so great they're not prepared to use their expensive traditional crash test dummies. So as a result, we've got to use these guys. These are shop front mannequins. These will hopefully give an idea of what it might be like for a human to experience a head-on 120 mile an hour incident. These are yours, mate. There you go, love. As the car was wheeled into position, I had nothing else to do but watch on and wait. Even in a controlled environment, the thought of such an impact sent shivers down my spine. It's round about this time that I get quite nervous. The sound of an accident is just catastrophic, but these guys have never actually tested a car this fast. So this is like proper unknown territory. I'm going to go and find a really safe place to sit down and admire the view. A crash like this takes some serious engineering. The car will be propelled towards the wall by a winch with 15,000 pounds-feet of torque. That's the equivalent of 16 Bugatti Veyrons. With forces that great, attention to detail is vital. One loose nut and we could be sending a 120 mile an hour Focus into the middle of Nuneaton. Brace yourselves, these images are disturbing. Sensitive viewers and those with a dicky ticker might want to look away now. This is it. Oh my God! Oh my God! Listen to the echo. The Focus is obliterated on impact. Only the rear end escapes total destruction. And the passengers? Don't ask. God, the hairs on the back of my neck are sharp as nails. The car decelerates from 120 miles an hour to 0 in 68 milliseconds, with its occupants experiencing peaks of 400 G. The front end hits the wall with such force that the back end rises up 90 degrees and the car is slam dunked down onto its nose. Crash test expert Tony Payne talked me through the scale of this wreckage. Absolutely mauled.
Yes, you've got the vehicle crushed nearly all the way back to the B-pillar. You can see here, for an occupant in there, absolutely no survival space at all. There's the rear seat, and there's the steering wheel there, and literally it's been compressed between the front and rear seat down to that distance. And the front seat is now resting against the engine blocks. There's literally no space for the legs at all.
I don't really like being this close to it. My God, that's the roof. It's like a tin of sardines.
And now the worst thing, you can see the jack down there.
Yeah.
And that's actually was originally in the back of the car and has now appeared at the front.
Look.
You've halved the length of the vehicle.
I was going to say Ford Focuses aren't 6'2".
No.
I mean, this is really quite sinister.
The wheels have completely disintegrated. The whole engine block's now been squashed right up into the passenger compartment. The fuel tank, look how that's been distorted under its own mass.
That's incredible. Of course, because nothing's actually hit that.
No.
It's just followed in from the impact.
Yes.
Goodness me. It's almost turned into a piece of modern art.
And if we go right round into the car itself, front seat's right in there. That's the instrumentation panel, and the person's literally in that area there.
I mean, I know it's all not real, but it's still mighty haunting. It is an extreme scenario, but modern family hatchbacks can reach the speeds we saw today. Maybe it'll make you think twice the next time you want to put your foot down.